Welcome to the RotoViz Best Ball Show with myself, Colm Kelly. I'm joined by Blair Andrews. We are excited to be drafting today in Underdog Fantasy's BBM5. Lots to talk about. We might talk some of the prize structure, the layout overall of the contest, and then we'll talk, as the show is titled, a little bit about elite tight end, and we'll go into some of our favorite tight end targets for this season. But we'll also do a draft, potentially implement those strategies or draft those tight ends. So lots to cover on the show today. Blair, I mentioned before we kicked off, I am excited to get drafting here, to get in. This is my back door always into these contests because, being over here at this side of the Atlantic, I cannot access an account, but we can have some fun in these contests. And you can have fun in them as well. With the code RotoViz, gets you a 100% sign-up bonus up to $100 if you are playing on a new account over at Underdog Fantasy. $25 gets you into this contest today with just extravagant prize pool totals, as we'll talk through in a moment. But Blair, we are about to get into it all. How are you feeling today as we have our second one of these off-season streams? Can't really call them off-season streams anymore. We're in baseball season.
That's right. No off-season. Yeah, I'm excited. These are always a lot of fun. I'm happy to help you get your Underdog best ball fix here.
Get those exposures.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a lot of interesting stuff. Of course, the schedule came out last night. I'm sure we can talk about that a little bit as we get into the structure and as we start drafting. But yeah, really exciting time.
Yeah, so let's jump into that to kick things off. We obviously have the schedule, gives us week 16, week 17, gives you the entire season, obviously, to see how you want to lay these things out. But in terms of, previous seasons with the such top heavy payout structure in this contest, week 17, very vitally important to have the edge there. But now we are obviously, and this is the other thing, as Underdog expands, as all of the best ball industry expands, and there's more and more contests, there's more and more data, there's more people researching it. We have more win rates on what helps you to win, to have success on those rosters. And we'll be talking about that today with some of the draft strategies and roster constructions that we talk about. But that also factors into, with the flatter payout, getting to the final is obviously vitally important. Obviously, getting to the final in the past was vitally important, but now getting in also leads you to having the opportunity to have that flatter payout with more people having six-figure prizes, for example, than there was in previous years. So it is going to be very interesting, but week 16 a factor, week 17 a factor, all the weeks, of course, a factor, but that's where the money is decided at the end of it. And Michael Dubner with a really good breakdown of it up on rotoviz.com, talking about a huge amount of this from the kind of portion of the prize pool that can be attributed to a ticket to the final, how much it's all split up throughout the entire season, and then breaking into some strategy advice and exposures and so on. So Dubner, one of the absolute best at this stuff. But Blair, how are you, shaping up this year's BBM5 to last year's BBM4? And each year we get little wrinkles as the contests get bigger as well. So you're looking at it from slightly different angles.
Yeah, definitely check out Michael Dubner's article. He goes into great detail and kind of how you should be thinking about the contest this year as opposed to last year. I mean, you mentioned the flatter payout. One thing that's really interesting is that if you make it to the finals this year, you're guaranteed basically to get your money back. If you enter 150 lineups, the minimum prize in week 17 is $37.50, which is what it would cost you to enter 150 times. So in the past, you wouldn't even be like, you could make the finals with one team and still end up losing money, which can't happen this week. So it does make, whereas in the past, there was a lot more prize money at the top. You had to get into week 17, and then you had to do really well in week 17 to even break even, but especially to do well. Now it seems like just getting to the finals, into the finals, is you get a bigger prize for that. So it actually makes week 16 possibly a little bit more important than it has been in past seasons. So I think you can, from that perspective, you can start to look a little closer at the week 16 matchups. Obviously, they have always been kind of important. Week 17 matchups still, that's where the big prize is. So you still are paying attention to that. I mean, yeah, Michael talks about all this in his article, and even brings up some reasons for thinking that week 16 and week 17 might still be, even though they're important, still there's a question about how much you can do to really influence your advance rates and win rates in these weeks. So it is a difficult problem to tackle, but interesting certainly to think about.
So when we look at it, top prize still 1.5 million this year, and I've always been I don't know how you feel about this, Blair, but with national lotteries or with lottery contests, we often see like it's so heavily structured to the top. And I always like there's a thing here called the Euro Millions, which is all of Europe, and it's similar to the lotteries in America, where it's just a gigantic prize at the top.
Right.
And I've always thought like it would be better for 20 people to win $1 million than one person to win $20 million. Obviously, then the grab for the attention isn't as high when it's lower total prize at the top. But this year they've gone with that flatter structure, and I think it's very, very appealing. 20 players or 20 winners, I believe, are going to come out with six-figure prizes, which is much more than previously. So lots of great information from Dubner in that. We won't break it all down. We might mention some of it as we go through the rest of today's stream. The part, though, that we will jump into now is, elite tight end, and how that is a way that I like to build my teams. I know, Blair, you like to build them that way. When we talk about zero RB, having an elite tight end can help supercharge those teams. But it is interesting to look at the landscape from this year to last year. And we look back, and you had a piece last year looking at some of the tight ends, that were going between, I think it was around 12 to around 18 in these drafts, and which ones were destined for potential breakouts. And, some of the names in there that I really liked that I drafted a lot of didn't get to the end goal. But then we had so many players, like Sam Laporta, like Trey McBride, that were going in those later ranges and have absolutely smashed to the point that they are now elite tight ends. And when we're talking about the structure, so when I think it muddies the water for people who maybe are looking at elite tight end from the perspective of like, these guys were at the back end of drafts last year, so maybe I can just hold off and get this year's version of that right now in round 17, round 16. But they are now in that elite tight end price, and that also can be a case where I got them last year in round 15. I don't want to pay third round price for them this season. So there's a lot of different aspects to talk through, I guess, in terms of elite tight end. But when we're talking about it, we're talking about one of those kind of top 4 or 5 guys in general. Sometimes it can, leak down. A lot of people are going to say that Kyle Pitts definitely isn't an elite tight end, but there is the potential for him to be in that category, let's say in 12 months' time, if he does what we thought he could have done and has not done outside of his rookie season. Some people may even say the likes of a George Kittle's in there, but really this year it's, Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, Travis Kelce, Kincaid, and then Mark Andrews, and people will have them maybe shuffled in slightly different orders. So you're looking at, before round 5 with those particular tight ends. But there has been a big shuffle, as I mentioned, with the younger guys pushing themselves into that stratosphere, I guess. Do you think that's going to have people this year leaning more to attacking those tight ends because they've seen the dominance that those players had in terms of success in 2024 or 2023, sorry? Or do you think it's going to be a case where people divert and think, let's look at these guys late on? Because the options late on this year are not the same as, pre-breakout options that were there last season at this point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think, you have to kind of take each season on its own terms and look at it individually. So last year you did have the Laportas and McBrides and some other guys who we expected to break out. In some cases they did. Yeah, in some cases they didn't. So that's kind of how it goes. But this year, right, I think there are a couple names that you can point to as being possibilities for breakouts, but it's just a lot harder to find those names late in drafts this year. So I do think we'll see more people being attracted to the elite tight ends. I mean, you always get people drafting late tight ends who can give you spike weeks, who can score a couple touchdowns every, a couple games a year. And I don't think that's really what you're looking for when you're looking for a late tight end. I think you want to find the the McBrides and the Laportas,
Yeah,
and
the trouble,
they're not there every season.
Yeah, the trouble that I would say, looking through, the names are going by ADP from rounds 18 all the way to say rounds 12, even, you start to get into then like Cole Kmet or Pat Firemouth, who have shown upside but have a lot of challenges around maybe offensive structure or competing for targets, and the likes of Kmet. Then you have the likes of Luke Musgrave, who I really like from the Packers, but is going to be there with Tucker Kraft, could be kind of siphoning some of the stuff from each other. You have Ben Sinnott. We talked there about Trey McBride. Trey McBride was stuck behind a man called Zach Ertz for a good portion of last season. And that also is a case for Sinnott. So we have him with a rookie quarterback trying to do that. So there is potential names that could have upside. But when we look through the names at the bottom end of the draft, it just doesn't have the same upside as it had in those previous years. Even the likes of a Bowers going round 9, like lots of upside, but not that little bit of a discount that you may have got on, Sam Laporta at this time last year. So the next question I have for you is, when we look at elite tight end, is that something you're trying to do in every draft? And the second question is something that me and Sean have talked about sometimes on RotoViz over time, is trying to get 2 of these guys before the kind of round 9, I would say round 9 cutoff of David Njoku, Brock Bowers, as I mentioned. But then round 10, you do have Dallas Goedert and TJ Hawkinson. Hawkinson going to miss some time. He would, for me, as a talent, be in the elite tight end category, but he's going to miss some time. But maybe it is even an option to take one of those first guys and to take him and have him back and recovered. But a lot of these drafts with myself and Sean, we're almost trying to get 2 of those guys before you exit round 10. Well, the question first is that something that you're looking to do? And how important is it to have one of those guys in your lineup? And then I'll move on to another question about how that affects the overall structure after that.
It is something I'm trying to do in a lot of drafts, to get 2 of them. I think I don't want to leave a draft without at least one of those elite tight ends. And getting 2, I think, can be even better. Kind of depending on what other picks you've made in those early rounds. But yeah, I love getting 2 elite tight ends on my teams. A lot of the drafts I've done so far have started that way, and certainly at least one. Like, I don't know if I've drafted a team yet that doesn't have, honestly, that doesn't have one of Laporta or McBride. So
yeah, and the other part, as I mentioned, 0 RB and elite tight end and pairing them together. There's a lot of these parts and these questions as we try and put that jigsaw together as to how your draft's going to play out and how things will work out with the draft strategy. But it's a part of, like, when I see people talk non-RotoViz alum, I guess we'll say, there's often not as much talk about trying to get that tight end in there, or then moving into the quarterback window and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of parts that go into it outside of just trying to load up on the wide receiver position. The second thing then is, if you do take 2 of those in those first 9 rounds, that leaves you with obviously the 7 other picks that you can do. And very hard to pair, an elite quarterback with 2 elite tight ends and then have the wide receiver firepower that you're looking to have. So there's lots of things to work into that. So it can be a little bit of a challenge. And another thing I like to talk about is back to front drafting and kind of knowing the areas of the back of the draft where you can potentially get some of the other sides to help balance that out. But lots that we've kind of talked about. I think the best way to jump forward is probably to get ourselves set up here for a draft, and we can talk through some of this as we draft across. And we have some people here with us. We have Chris, we have Bendels, we have David. Some people, nice morning messages. I did joke with Blair before we kicked off here. It is just after 4 p.m. here over in Ireland, and that leads to having some jobs done today. I've done some painting outdoors. We're having some good weather over here. So yeah, I have a day done at this particular point, but looking forward to having some fun time now to jump into this draft as we wait for a couple more. Who, with your draft so far, have you had a favorite area of the round? Favorite selection? Are you looking to be in the middle, at the turns, early, late? How are you finding your drafts falling for you?
Yeah, I've been happy with the teams I've been able to build from, like, 105, 104, 106, that range where you can still get kind of one of the top 5 guys, and you don't have to wait a long time. I mean, I always enjoy drafting at the turns too, and taking those two picks back to back is always fun. So
With those middle of the draft picks, you do get the opportunity to see what's coming towards you. And I do think at
right.
times you do get some more, fallers. Like they're unlikely to fall all the way to the back of a round, for example, whereas they might
Yep.
go 3 picks and you get, some nice areas of the draft like that. But as you mentioned, from that 4 through 8 spot, I do think it allows you with, the elite tight ends. So we talked about, Sam Laporta, mid 3rd round, Dalton Kincaid and Trey McBride in the 4th with Travis Kelce. I think it opens you up to select some of those and to still get some of the priority targets in the rounds 1 and 2 ahead of them as well. So we'll see what we get. Usually when we jump in these, they're flying and filling up, but I'm just checking here. We're still waiting on 9, so we just missed out on one.
Yeah,
it's always
the
fun of doing these live to get them set up. And
now
Chris
that we showed
the board.
Yeah, showed the board, and we're gonna have stream snipers jumping in, but that's all right.
Yeah. So we'll have some fun and see what happens. We'll do that if that comes to be. But Chris messages that he is thinking that his good weather is better than the good weather over here. I would truly believe that. I think we're in the 18 degrees, which you'll have to translate because it's not something that I'm very good at doing. But myself and Sean Siegel are often joking about, when I say it's very hot here, and it's like that's basically winter weather for him in Arizona. So fun times. We're not equipped here to deal with anything once it goes into the 20s. I don't think so. Back to draft conversation, and when we get through those names, I'm very comfortable with having Laporta, McBride, Kincaid, Kelce. The ones then that I think start to get that a little bit interesting. You have Mark Andrews coming back off the injury. I think talent isn't the question, but he obviously has had his huge season a couple of seasons back, which propelled me, yourself, and Sean to the FFPC best ball final. And outside of that one mega season, it hasn't hit those elite heights, I guess. So there's some questions with that. Kyle Pitts, we all know the questions. We don't really have to retread that, but now he does not have Arthur Smith there. And George Kittle, you mentioned a player who can hit those heights. He can hit extremely high heights, but because of the offense and the players that are involved in San Francisco, it can be hard for him to do that consistently. Then you move into Evan Ingram in the 7th round, who had in terms of receptions last year, a monster season in terms of how much he was using that offense. At that point there, how are you feeling are you feeling that the split is kind of between Kincaid and Andrews, or is he right in that top group for you?
I think I would put Andrews in that top group. I'd put Kittle in that top group even, and just with his upside, I think you can afford to. I mean, you can think of him as like a tight end 1 in an elite tight end, in like a 2 elite tight end build. I mean, when I say I don't want to leave the draft without at least one of these guys, I'm probably thinking of a tier that goes down to about Bowers.
Okay.
But does not include Jake Ferguson.
Yeah, that was the next one. He's the one that I liked what he did last year, throughout the season. But I also think that in terms of the level of talent and the upside, I think his is capped a little bit more than those guys.
Right.
Is he somebody just that the other thing with those guys is when you get to like Jake Ferguson in the 8th round, he's going in a range where there's quite like it's a heavy running back round, but there's a lot of 0 RB kind of running backs in there with that profile. So is it on Jake Ferguson, or is it on the round that he's going in that area?
It's a little bit of both. Ferguson did have a kind of surprisingly good season last year, but I'm still, I guess, a little bit more of a skeptic about his ability to really elevate into that kind of Laporta McBride tier. Whereas I think, with Bowers, we're confident that is well within the range of outcomes. And still waiting for 2 people. Sorry. And with like a guy like Hawkinson, we've seen him put up those kind of points, even though We probably won't have a full 16-game season from him. At least we know that he's got that kind of upside.
Yeah, we did get a comment here from David that says that it feels like Ferguson is priced at the ceiling. I kind of I think he's like in the range of where he should be, but he is in a spot where the other names are much more even a Christian Watson, who's going in that same range as at a different position. And again, depending on what we're doing, like if I can get Njoku, in the next round, or I can get Bowers in the next round, and I can go and get Christian Watson or Jalen Warren or James Conner, Raheem Mostert, they're all names that would interest me in that point over him. So I do feel like I think that he probably should be going in the same spot as Dallas Goedert's going, which is 2 rounds later, and probably would be more appealing to me at that particular price. But
that's probably right.
Yeah. So it does.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's right, that his price isn't that bad, but what is probably the case is that someone like Bowers should be going about 2 rounds earlier.
Yeah. And the other part of it, I do think, is that with Ferguson, he's obviously been seen almost as the second option in Dallas to CD Lamb, which is kind of almost artificially inflating that a little bit. And then obviously if you go for a stack with CD Lamb and Dak Prescott, you kind of are looking then to get that second piece on your roster, which is going to turn out to be Ferguson. So we'll get to talk about these guys more as we go through the draft. Blair, we've drawn the number 7 spot. Who are you looking to get on the roster here?
Yeah.
And it's funny because you're in that Breece Hall range. I'm always intrigued, but I think we're going to be pushing here to get one of these wide receivers.
We'll kind of see who makes it. I mean, I've got the RotoViz consensus rankings loaded in here. Okay, Jefferson is probably the easy pick here, unless you want to do something crazy.
For me, I was hoping that somebody fell, but if they didn't, it was Wilson for me. The other player that's in there that's interesting is Nakua, but I just think I know we have concerns with the quarterback play and so on, but the elite talent of Justin Jefferson is unquestionable. And we were drafting him at the 101 last year, and I do understand that Kirk Cousins, for me, is still somebody who's has a limited upside, although he can get fantasy production for his wide receivers. I think there's quite a bit of that is on the wide receiver producing from not a huge amount in terms of elite quarterback play, and I think that they can at worst manufacture Justin Jefferson a lot of targets, and he can do a lot after the catch as well. So I just find it so hard to pass Jefferson up at this particular point of the draft.
Yeah, agreed. Right. I mean, I think the questions about QB play in Minnesota are maybe a little bit overblown when you have a talent like Jefferson. So I'm not really that worried about his ability to succeed despite the rookie quarterback.
We may not get a true elite ceiling season where he breaks all the records, but he's going to have a huge season nonetheless. Sure. So we are 2 picks away. It's been heavy, obviously, as we would expect at the wide receiver position. The last couple of picks are AJ Brown, Harrison, Drake London, Devontae Adams. We have 2 picks coming up. This is Ayuk off the board. I would kind of love to get Chris Olave here if that was the case, and he makes it one more pick to us. Is he your preferred option, or is there another name for you? He would
be my preferred pick here. One thing we didn't really get into, but if you are going to try and get multiple elite tight ends in the early rounds, I think it's important that that works best with a 0 running back build, because you still want that wide receiver firepower. There we go.
Yeah, we get Saquon Barkley off the board, which is and again, even by Blair, you mentioned you have the consensus rankings pulled up. I have your rankings pulled up, which would have put him into play as an actual running back at this particular spot at the 205. So I think that's a fair pick from that drafter, but like getting Olave. And I also think it's interesting with him. We have a situation, Derek Carr is the quarterback, and, I'm not, again, a bit like Kirk Cousins, I'm not the biggest Derek Carr truther, I guess we'll say, but in terms of having an offense that is built around a star wide receiver. I think last season was I think that was the if we're saying like there's a crater, I think we were at the bottom of the crater, in which was still a season where it felt like with Olave, every time you watched him on a Sunday, there was so many highlight plays that were just like millimeters from being a huge reception or a long touchdown, and it just each week it was that it was incomplete for a variety of different reasons. But a huge faith in his talent and his ability as well. So a Justin Jefferson Olave start for me is pretty hot stuff. And now that we're talking elite tight ends, Sam Laporta is usually going in the mid third, around the 305. If it was a case that he happened to fall 2 more picks, he would be in the conversation for us there. Then Travis Kelce, early 4th round, and then mid 4th round, Trey McBride, late 4th round, Dalton Kincaid. So there's a possibility here, they're all in play. The other players, that I would love to see potentially make it to us, if they don't make it to us, would be a Jalen Waddle, who actually goes at the 212. I was going to mention him. Then we get into an area where it's like some questionable things, some rookie upside. Neighbors is there, Pittman's there, DK Metcalf, Devontae Smith, Cooper Kupp. There's some.
There goes Laporta.
Laporta goes, so that's okay. We'll adjust as we go through. But when somebody like a Laporta goes, it does also give some opportunities for some of those other names that I mentioned to slide on through. But the one I was really hoping to slide on through was Jalen Waddle. And if you are that drafter still crazy at the 101, if you are listening to the stream, let us know in the comments. We'll keep giving you our player takes, but that's a nice start with Christian McCaffrey, Jalen Waddle, and Sam Laporta. Then we get Stephon Diggs and Mike Evans going off the board. So Evans, a couple of picks after where we have him ranked. So we're 2 picks away. We'll see who comes through. I know Blair's reluctant to say names here in case they pop up. Who's sitting here that you would be most intrigued by? I think ADP wise, it's probably that our rankings wise. Sorry, it's the guy a couple of picks down, and that would be Devontae Smith. Out of those other names, T. Higgins is somebody else, so we would like to discuss. But
right.
I feel pretty confident here in Smith being added to this team.
I definitely like Devontae Smith. Just looking at what else, but I think he's the clear pick for me. So
let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah, it would have been nice to get if Laporta could have fallen, or if maybe Malik Neighbors could have fallen, but I'm definitely happy with Devontae Smith. We're setting this team up to be a real kind of a column special with Minnesota.
I love the way, we're going for Minnesota. That's my favorite team. I thought you were saying a column special where we had started off with, we're starting to get into our 0RB, groove here. But anytime me and Blair draft, it's inevitable that it's going to be, just all wide receivers. So if you want us to draft more wide receivers, give us a thumbs up if you're watching this video as well, because we just love them guys. But we are also open, and I mentioned if you don't get Laporta, we'll see what happens. By luck, some of these other tight ends will go off the board too. But we are still, if you miss on the first one, it opens the door for a few other ones. The other thing I mentioned about not being Derek Carr's biggest fan, just so I can put this out there for later in the stream when we end up drafting Derek Carr to go with Chris Olave. Certain players, certain scenarios like that will open up for some of those cheaper backdoor stacking elements as we move through this draft. So there will be some opportunities like that as well. So I always be reluctant to go too hard on saying how much I dislike certain options. Right. If we weren't looking here, if we had gotten elite tight end, the player that would certainly be on my radar now, Zay Jones, T. Higgins, Xavier Worthy, lots of options of nice wide receivers, even Jordan Addison. If something worked out that he somehow snuck back to us in the following round, could be very intriguing, to lean into the Minnesota side of things. But
I think you definitely could.
This is a nice zone, I think, of wide receiver talent. There's certain areas of the draft. I even find this area I'm probably a little more optimistic on than that round 3.
Early options and pick there. So we're back on the clock. Obviously, Flowers is the top name, but we have the elite tight ends we can consider. What are you thinking here?
I'm going to default to you here. I think we're going to have some of these wide receiver options come back, and I think we want to get one of these tight ends at this point.
I agree. Let's go with McBride. little bit ahead of ADP, but I'm happy with it.
We'll get him. We'll get the wide receiver 1 for the Arizona Cardinals on the roster here.
What I was going to say is, even though you're not the biggest Derek Carr fan and maybe not the biggest Vikings fan, we do get, with our first 2 picks, the team that plays Green Bay in Week 17 and the team that plays Green Bay in Week 16. So we're setting this up
completely by design here as well. We've set it up so we can get. I mentioned Christian Watson earlier on the episode. We'll get him in there. We'll get Jordan Love. We'll set some things up. But I do think this area, and what I was just kind of mentioning, there's the zone of the draft here through kind of round 4 into round 5. There's a lot more wide receivers that I'm really into in those 2 rounds, and maybe even that round 3 zone. Not as much on Stephon Diggs, and I keep saying this every time I mention Mike Evans. He has proven me wrong season on season on season, where I keep saying it. But you have DJ Moore now with more competition, DK Metcalf. Those veterans are usually unlikely to get into the rosters in these early rounds when I'm drafting them. But this zone where you get even a Odunze went earlier than I would be looking to take him, but you get Zay Flowers, T. Higgins has gone past there. Some very, very interesting names in this range. And with the way that this round is playing out with Mahomes, White, Jacobs, since we last picked, that may lead to one of these wide receivers getting back to us in the following round, which would be quite a delight. But T. Higgins goes off the board, as I say.
Higgins.
Yeah. And here the drafter in 1 is going to pick two wide receivers here as well as they're listening in.
Take one of our guys. Yeah, I still think there are some interesting wide receiver names here, depending on how far we want to reach. But yeah, I agree with you. I like this range for wide receivers. I think both Higgins and Zay Flowers should probably be going at least a round earlier than this. So definitely happy to get McBride, but this is a good range for wide receivers as well.
And I have to mention as well, I did say earlier, Blair, and you're probably wondering what is Colm referencing here. I did mention about Saquon Barkley at a range where I had up the actual.
Yeah, that was puzzling.
I had up the ADP at that particular point for Underdog. I have 2 tabs open here, one with the rankings, one with the ADP. So we have to strike that from the record. That was
no. Barkley is not a player I would be taking at 205.
So we are now a couple of picks away. Let's see do you want? What are you doing? Are you afraid? Are we going to show the queue here? Are we going to tap our hand? Or are we going to?
We don't have a queue. We have.
Well, we don't have a queue.
Well, we do have our rankings.
Players. Yeah.
Yes. I'm okay.
I think that what we'll just say here is with this next pick coming up, I'm comfortable with basically 6 to 7 names in this range. And if we get 2 of these in the next 2 picks, I would be quite extraordinarily happy.
Definitely. Yeah. There's some names who are near the top of the list who have a chance to come back to us in the 6th round.
Yep.
So it kind of depends.
That was my question I was going to put to you is with your rankings. So for people watching on video, they'll see that you have your rankings, then you have the ADP. This
is right now a combination of my rankings and Sean's rankings that are my rank.
Yeah. So that means, for example, Xavier Worthy is 16 spots ahead in your rankings than he is by ADP, 56 ADP, 40 in the rankings. How aggressive are you? Are you trying to factor that in? Let's see if we get him back in the following round, or are you just saying like, he goes, somebody's seen your rankings?
I kind of agree with the thing Sean says a lot, which is that what you want to get especially is rankings value, probably even more than ADP value. If I can get a guy who's going after ADP and after where I have him ranked, that's ideal. But if you have to pick one of those, you'd rather overpay a little bit by ADP than overpay based on your rankings.
Yeah, so that comes in interesting here with Reed and Addison, who are both available for us, but there's more of a gap in their ADP versus rank than there is, for example, in the likes of Keenan Allen. So I'm going to let you give us a tour of how you would use your rankings to make this selection.
So in this case, because we have the 66th pick, that's even ahead of Addison's ADP. I might be willing to risk it and take Reed and then hope Addison comes back to us in the 6th round. And that is what we are going to be doing because we ran out of time.
And that is why we love to filibuster on the clock. The interesting thing about that is just to see some of the inside process as to how we're making those selections to try and make it fit and come back to you in the following round. And both of those players,
now that we've said that, Addison's definitely not going to come back. But
we don't want Addison anyway. We're going to stack up the Packers from this point
Minnesota.
forward. Yeah, we're going to stack the Packers side now moving forward. So
exactly,
take all the Vikings you want, but we do get a little bit of a crossover there with both of those games, as you mentioned, with Jefferson and Olave with Reed. So that's where the strategy or the schedule being released makes it quite intriguing. Then when the drafts are, just it adds that extra wrinkle with the additional information that you have.
And I think that this is a good way to approach it, where Reed is a really good fit on this team because he plays Minnesota in 17. He plays New Orleans in week 16, but he also was a good value at this pick. So we're not going out of our way to make that correlation work. But, when it does work out, that's kind of just serendipity, and we're happy to capitalize on that.
And I really like what you were kind of saying there as well about, where your next pick is. Because people think of a reach, it's a round ahead, but it's like, can you get this player on your roster or not?
Right.
Do you want him over the guys that have gone in between these two picks? Right. And interestingly enough, there's quite a few names that we didn't even talk about previously that are still going to be available at this next pick that I would have been happy to take at that last selection as well. So these are times where sometimes with the rankings as well, that if you have a player, ahead of ADP, you're trying to get those into the roster. And that was the other player who went quite a bit ahead of ADP.
That was crazy, yeah.
But
I was going to say, this is a case where
he was a backup pick for me there.
Yeah, this is a case where I'd scroll ahead and see, okay, 79, that's right around JSN's ADP. We can wait on him. Now, I'm happy with either of these guys, Addison or Kittle.
You're on the clock. You go. You're on the clock.
I know. So which do you want?
I think we'll take Addison. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, Addison's good. Addison's a good fit with this team. Kittle, of course, is kind of, maybe he's like the end of a mini tier of elite tight ends.
Yeah.
So I do like to get him in a lot of cases, but there are other guys I like too.
You did mention him already, and David messages in here, Addison, baby. So we have some Addison supporters in the house. But the thing with Kittle, and there's a bit more of a squeeze sometimes in these situations if you have gone and missed out. Let's say when we took our selection for McBride, we pass on him there, then we miss out on him, we miss out on Kincaid, we miss out on Kelsey, and then that leaves us in a situation where we missed out on Kittle there. But you don't have the opportunity to pass up some of those players when the pressure's on. So in this situation, we still have some of those fallback options that we have talked about as another tight end option. And even at that, if we did miss out on the guys we've talked about, there are still some potential targets later on in the draft to, go maybe from a 2 tight end build to a 3 tight end build. But I like Addison paired. And that really is something then that, what I would like to do at this point is, star our Minnesota quarterback just to make sure that we're aware at all times of the ADP discussion when he's coming up. But we are setting ourselves up for that direction. But as the round plays out, we'll see what happens then from the Green Bay selection. So we're opening up paths to stacks where it shouldn't be as forced. I mentioned earlier, if we want to go with the Olave route, or later on if we want to pick up Kyler Murray to go Trey McBride, there's ways around it rather than having to have one of the elite quarterbacks. Because if you want, Lamar, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, they're all off the board at this point. If you want them on your roster, you're really needing to invest heavily in those stacks. So we have some options for us moving forward. But so far through this draft, we have Justin Jefferson, Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, Jalen Reed, Jordan Addison, and Trey McBride. So I think this is shaping up to be a Blair Andrews Colm Kelly special, I think.
Exactly. This is exactly the way I like to start all my drafts. I'm extremely pleased with the players we've been able to get, even getting sniped on a few guys we like. Sometimes it's a good thing. I have Jackson Smith and Jigba in probably 75% of my teams already. So when he goes, a round ahead of where he should go, it's a good time for me not to get him.
Yeah, I was pretty aggressive because he was somebody who I was talking about as a potential fallback option when I was trying to talk in code if Addison went. But that would still have been probably a round ahead of his ADP. So
Right.
we were being aggressive, but we were out aggressive. If that's
when I say around ahead of where he should go, I mean around ahead of where his ADP is. He should probably be going 2 rounds ahead of where his ADP is.
Yeah, that's true. So since we got Mixon, Kittle did go off the board, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, Kenneth Walker, who is probably the first running back of the 0 RB, and it is in the 6th round, but he's the first one where I start to think maybe we go this way. Then we get Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas Jr., Chris Godwin, Aaron Jones, Rashee Rice. So we are 2 picks away from our next selection, but as the draft is falling to us, Hopkins goes off the board, and again, nothing against the likes of a DeAndre Hopkins, but he's just not a player that I'm interested in drafting. So when I see names like that go off the board before a pick that we're about to make, it's pretty positive.
Exactly.
One more pick away. I think we're pretty clear. We'll see. I think this player could go in this pick, but his ADP is a lot less, so he doesn't. I was just feeling that. So we have the option here to get a second tight end, or we have the option to go with the likes of a Jalen Warren, but both of those options are significantly later by ADP.
Right. So I think if we're looking at ADP, this might be a good range to get a quarterback. We need to make the selection.
Let's go with Bowers. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, we ran out of time on that one. Big reach by ADP to get Bowers at 79. He's going around pick 100. He was still a rankings value though for me and Sean. We have him. I forgot where our rank was, but he was the top ranked player on the board. So, it's not a great value by ADP, but it is a good value based on where he should go and where I expect he will be going later in the season.
Yeah, I think when those training camp clips start to come out, he starts moving up. So I think that it's pretty nice to get in there. Christian Watson was somebody we joked about. He does go 1 pick later.
Yeah.
But we're in a range there where our top priorities, and you'll see this in some rounds, our top priorities are all kind of picks from 2 rounds down. And that's a range, again, a bit like I said about kind of that wide receiver tier in round 3, kind of how things play out. I think that I like more players in rounds kind of 8, 9 than I do in that kind of round 7.
Round 7, right? Exactly. I mean, if you get a Kenneth Walker falling to round 7, that's an interesting pick. We're about to be back on the clock. Again, we're looking at some pretty big reaches, unless we want to take a quarterback here, which could be a decent fit. We've got some options for stacking.
So the 2 options you added are Kyler Murray and Jordan Love. Like both of those, would probably prefer Jordan Love based on some of the, I mentioned Luke Musgrave. There's some tight end options and things later that could be factored in. Then we do have quite a few kind of running backs that we would start to move into, but I would rather pick up the quarterback at this point and then running back in the following spot.
Yeah, let's do that. Kyler Murray's a little bit, he's the clear value, but I think Love is a good fit for this team where we have
I also think
the Vikings.
I also think factoring it in, like Kyler Murray's ADP is not where it should be, in my opinion. I think that he's somebody who, if we don't have Trey McBride, should be multiple rounds later. He is. I think
I kind of agree with that.
What we've seen with Jordan Love in the second half of last season is, we have seen Kyler have really strong stretches, but they are a long time ago. So I do have some concerns around, what the upside of Kyler is outside of being able to support, an elite tight end.
Yeah.
But obviously now you have him factored in, with Marvin Harrison. So we're pushing up his ADP, but I feel like it's a little bit inflated. And I do think that when we look at the names that are going, obviously you have the rookie quarterbacks that could make that jump instantly, but when we're looking at the veteran quarterbacks that could jump into that elite tier, I feel like Love's performance at the back end of last season is the one that could be jumping up into an ADP in the 5th round next season. So he's the one that I would try and add. The one player that went off the board that I would have taken over him at the running back position, I would have liked to get Jalen Warren if he had to come back to us. When we were having that conversation, we took Bowers. My thought was maybe we try and get Warren here, but I was kind of confident he might have come back to us in that next round.
Yeah. If we had not been under so much time pressure, I think we might have been able to make a smarter decision and get Warren in the 7th and Bowers in the 8th. And then, with a lot of quarterbacks still on the board, I think there was a good chance for Love to fall even to round 9. But, you kind of can't second guess yourself like that.
That's all the fun of live streaming these drafts. I do think sometimes there's a little bit of negative EV in streaming them. Not only that you can get sniped, but that you're trying to both communicate takes on players, which you don't do when you're doing these offline, and then obviously you're trying to pick with 30 seconds to go. But I'm really pleased with the players and the profiles of those players that we have drafted, because I think the upside is very much there for what we're starting off to do here. But Warren,
definitely,
yeah, that might have been in hindsight a smarter call to go Warren and then see if Bowers comes back to us.
Right.
But since we've picked, we do see Joe Burrow go off the board, we see Jared Goff go off the board, and now Dak Prescott. So
right. A lot of quarterbacks coming off, so I think Love was the right pick.
We've kicked off a little quarterback run. 3 selections away from our next pick. Oh, Brock Purdy goes off as well, so we are heavy here at the quarterback position.
Yeah,
and would have also
still there, of course.
Yeah, and Njoku was the player that we talked about, as a second option as an elite tight end. At the back, the last one for me, kind of. But now that we have 2, that was one that if we passed on Bowers there, we could. And it's in hindsight that the door could close down. But a couple of players that are coming up here that all running backs that are of interest. Tyjae Spears, Chase Brown, Raheem Mostert, all with varying ADP. So we might have to do what you mentioned a moment ago with taking some of the players that are lower ranked ahead of the players that are higher ranked. But we have some intriguing names here, and then Njoku did go off the board. So if we didn't take Bowers, we would be in a little bit of a squeeze right now.
We are
on the clock. Which of these is your favorite 0 RB target out of this list?
So out of this list, probably Chase Brown, although I think there's a good chance he makes it back. I'd be happy with Mostert. I'd be happy with Kyler at this ADP.
Mostert.
What are you thinking?
Mostert. Don't miss out. For people listening to the audio version of this after it's finished, Blair was doing his best Sean Siegel there to. As the clock ticked down, we had nobody starting the queue. The advantage of having your ranks loaded in here is Tyjae Spears would have been the option, so it would have been okay.
Right.
Yeah, but we got our first running back at this point of the draft, Raheem Mostert, and I think it's very interesting.
Raheem Mostert in the 9th round, definitely a range where you think he can just smash that ADP, even though they did add a pretty intriguing rookie, even though you have Achane still there. I mean, the way that team uses their running backs should give Mostert still a lot of value. So I like that.
This is the thing. I've kind of come to this approach like probably 4 or 5 years ago, but we look for the bell cow running backs, and there is a couple of those, and it's basically Christian McCaffrey and a few other names that change behind him every year. But in a situation where you have, a second-year running back, which we all like in Achane, and then we have Raheem Mostert, and then we have a rookie, 3 players that are a clear, potential trio that are going to split the touches and the targets. I think that's, fine. And if one of them did go down or one of them's underperforming, it just leaves huge upside. But you're looking at some of these backfields and there's like 7 guys and you're like, okay, what's happening here? Right. I think the Miami Dolphins backfield is just a perfect opportunity, and especially at this price.
It also makes a difference that it's the Dolphins backfield and not like if you had 3 guys in the Patriots backfield, it would be a different story. So the team context does matter. We're 1 pick away. We have Spears and Chase Brown still on the board. I think either of those picks would be fine here at pick 114. Marshawn Lloyd is down there. He probably will make it back, but he would fit with this team. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think we probably go with Chase Brown and see if we get Tyjae Spears to come back to us. Just he is a 4-pick later ADP. And that would be right around his ADP. But I think, again, we talked a couple of rounds ago about, the players that we could have potentially done a little bit different when we missed out on Warren, and then we took Love and we took Bowers. But for how this draft is played out through the opening 10 rounds, I think it's pretty much, perfect. You could shuffle the order of some of those things around. But I still think we would be very pleased with how this roster is with 10 players selected.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, right. Even with a few of the reaches we made, I think
and really it's really one reach. It's Brock Bowers,
right.
and
Bowers is the only
21
big one.
picks, 21 picks ahead of ADP.
Bowers is really the only big one, but I like the value we've been able to get on almost all the other guys. Maybe Chase Brown a little bit ahead of ADP, but other than that, we've been doing well with kind of being disciplined.
Yeah, and the other thing you mentioned, the rankings conversation. This will be good for people using the rankings on the site and drafting. But there is a case like if you use the rankings, like you would be drafting Brock Bowers 2 rounds ahead of ADP every time. I think this is a good example of like how to implement the rankings while you're drafting, because when you look at the rankings, there's going to be certain players that fall down quite a bit based on them not really being targets. I mentioned the likes of a DeAndre Hopkins potentially, and then that's going to mean that those names that you and Sean and that like, and they're pushed up in the rankings, they're well ahead of ahead of ADP. So it's a good just kind of example of working through those rankings and making these selections. But it is also, sometimes I mentioned to you like favorite spot in the draft, and this middle range, it does give you a little bit more time to like play those. Whereas if you're in a situation where you're picking at the 102 and you're like, I need to get this player's not coming back, you can get into picking players well ahead of where you would like to pick them. This gives you a little bit more freedom. And as we mentioned, a lot of players that if you're at the sides, you can't really pair together, that are working out, kind of feels very relaxed so far this draft, Blair.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. I've been in a lot of drafts where it feels like all my guys are getting sniped right ahead of where I'm about to pick them, but this one has been a little bit easier.
We did get a couple of notes in here. Now we will be up in 3 picks, so we may have to skip over the question and come back. But Chris mentions and Dave are kind of in a conversation in the chat, and they're mentioning about Cleveland facing the Dolphins and Week 17 in Cleveland. How much of an impact would you put on, in terms of the Cleveland's defense being problematic? We are at a point at this stage of the season where a lot of the stuff that we knew from last season is not going to be what we know come Week 17, and defense is likely to still be above average, but with potential injuries or with players declining in performance and so on and so forth, the picture in Week 17 could be drastically different to what we're expecting now at this particular point. How much would you be factoring in defensive scenarios and those kind of situations?
Yeah, I probably don't factor it in as much as I should. Let's finish this conversation after we make a pick here. We could get really crazy with one of these running backs. I don't think Wright fits on a Mostert team. What are your thoughts
We
here?
have 10 seconds left. I'm going to let you take the wheel.
Okay, we're going to reach for Lloyd then.
Charbonnet was the other option, but I was going to let you go. He fits in with what we've done so far. We were in a zone there where, again, it's another area of the draft where there's just not a huge amount of appeal. When I'm looking at the list here of who you could potentially take, like, Marvin Mims pops out as like, his ADP is 171.
Yeah, right.
When we're looking down by ADP, the names that would be here: Brian Robinson, TJ Hawkinson, Gus Edwards, Elliott, Blake Corum, Gabe Davis, Brandon Cooks. For me, Cooks is like, you'll get some of those weeks, but last year I think showed that he may be beyond it.
Yeah.
The other player, Charbonnet, was the other name I was going to mention. I'm quite hopeful he makes it. This will be 3 picks after ADP, but he might come back to us. Maybe in hindsight, he could have been the option.
It probably would have been smarter to take him. I mean, there are a lot of guys here who I have ranked below where they're going, but like Robinson would have been an interesting pick just because he kind of such a faller at that stage. Corum, I don't hate, although I think Kyron Williams is still kind of the guy there, and Corum might not have much value in year 1 at least. But yeah, probably would have been smarter to take Charbonnet there and then get Lloyd on the way back. Lloyd does give us another Packer, which is nice.
We are 3 picks away. It might work. 2 picks away.
Oh, shoot, what happened?
Blair gets logged out of his account
great.
on the
All
fly.
right.
So
He was in the queue. So let me make sure I can just log back in here.
and we'll cover up Blair's information as he
Yeah, make
gets
sure
logged
I
back
have
in.
I don't think I have my password saved in this browser. Anyway,
This is gonna be fun.
filibuster more.
Yeah, we do have Dave with a question asking how can we pass on Hawkinson. I did think that he's an interesting option to add back in with those other two tight ends, but it really for me is I think actually now that he mentions it, there is the upside of having that option and then seeing what we could get. But we did get Charbonnet on the clock, so we'll get back to the question. Quick relog in, and the player was there. It did take the the hype that we were building into would he make it to us, but for Dave's question, Hawkinson did go off the board one pick before. Sanat went off 2 picks before, so we weren't in a position to draft Hawkinson. But with the 2 tight ends that we have, having Hawkinson then to come back in, mid-season and add, that extra hammer to the position, I think I would be more likely to do that in situations where, you could start multiple, more flex spots, for example, to use them. Because based on our roster, if we take Hawkinson there, like I think Charbonnet along with Mostert, Chase Brown, and Lloyd, I think that that's really starting to round out the running back core. And I think that adding Hawkinson there is probably not the ideal selection to allocate with a needed another position. If, for example, Charbonnet, if we did this draft in future and Charbonnet went off the board, Kendry Miller was the next player. He would have been of interest. Jerome Ford was in our queue. He's just after going off the board about 5 picks later. But Hawkinson maybe in that situation would have been interesting because it's tricky to pick Hawkinson on a roster that doesn't have the tight end secured, if that makes sense. So then drafting him on one that is secure is a challenge as well.
Yeah, that's true. He feels like too expensive to draft onto a roster that already has 2 tight ends, but at the same time, if you draft him, you want maybe a 3rd tight end. So, I mean, I think if we didn't take Bowers, like if we had tried to push him to round 8 and he ended up getting picked, then Hawkinson would have become an interesting pick there. We could have taken, I don't know, like a Jatavian Sanders later or something. So
one thing David bounces back with is, he based on reports, he thinks he'll play most of the season, and that's fair. If he only misses the 6 weeks at the start, but it's still a big chunk, and it's a tricky decision to make based on if you either have the firepower tight end or if you don't. But we are back up on the clock. We're at pick 151. Some wide receivers here of interest. Some
Leggett is the top name by ADP and by the rankings. He's someone I'm not actually super thrilled about, but he does have that.
How do you feel about any interest in Wicks to go with the Packers elements of the roster? He's right.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. He's also a good pick, a good value by ADP. I think I like that pick better. So let's do that and see who makes it back to us.
This is one where you get into a tricky situation. Like so here, Dontavian Wicks, somebody that I don't know if I've talked with Sean about all off season long, had some flashes last season.
Yeah.
And then you get into Jaden Reed, who we selected. I wasn't high on that pick from the Packers, but when Jordan Love was emerging, I have had this thought in my head of, CJ Stroud, his wide receivers. Was it him or was it the wide receivers? It was likely him. In this situation with the Packers, it's likely Love. We've seen a number of players. We've seen Bo Melton have success. We've seen both tight ends have success. We've seen basically everyone that played with Jordan Love have success. And that makes it tricky then when you're stacking players. But you get in now to the 13th round and they become, it's not a make or break piece off the roster, but it has a lot of upside. But Wicks for me is one that I'm like, I drafted him, goes with the Packers, showed some flash, but is there really anything there? What's your thoughts on Wicks?
Yeah, I like Wicks. He was a kind of an intriguing prospect coming out of college, had some good production at Virginia, older prospect, but still pretty interesting. There's always that kind of chicken and egg question with good wide receiver quarterback combos, and certainly Love played really well, but I do think that his receivers do deserve some credit, especially Jaden Reed. And yeah, I think Wicks is also maybe a better receiver than a lot of people realize, and deserves to be going at least at this range. We are going to be on the clock in one pick.
Oh, I was going to say the thing with Wicks is there wasn't, and Musgrave did go off the board. The thing with Wicks is, there wasn't much at all through the opening kind of 6-7 weeks of the season, but week 17, week 15, 7 targets, 6 receptions, and both of those 2 touchdowns in week 17. So there's production coming as the season emerged. So he is an interesting one to have in there. Yeah. We are now at pick 161. Some of these players, in terms of rankings versus ADP, Marvin Mims, though, has been staring me in the face for multiple rounds. He is right at, he's a little bit ahead of ADP now, but
yeah,
AJ McCarthy the question was the other player.
Yeah, McCarthy should, based on ADP, he should make it back to us in the 15th round. I think so the question is, do we want to take a risk?
I think it's more important to take McCarthy and see if we get. I think that's probably the right decision there.
That's kind of what I'm thinking too.
We have 6 wide receivers. We now get our second quarterback to pair with Addison, who we did obviously take earlier, along with Justin Jefferson. So I think that's a smart call and hope that Mims slides back through. So he is an ADP of 171. You have him ranked though at 125. So just to give some people an idea of 50 picks basically ahead of ADP. But there's a lot of names that are in that situation. Bucky Irvine coming up. 173. There's a fallback option here for us, ranked at 135. So there's quite a few players who we've been looking at on the board here for quite some time. And Marvin Mims is one of them. So we'll be interested to see if he makes it 7 more selections. But the other option that I mentioned there's, there's some rookie running backs in particular, there'll be interesting fallback options to add in. I think we're completely set at quarterback now with those 2 quarterbacks. I wouldn't, I mentioned earlier the cheaper fallback options, but I think this is going to be a Derek Carr-less team. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the concern would be that Minnesota decides they want to let McCarthy sit, and at least for to start the season, and we might want that third QB just to kind of hold us over. There's some data analysis suggesting that 3 QBs outperform in the playoffs in particular, and that is a stronger construction in the later rounds, although it might not help you advance out of the regular season as well. But so I think there are some good reasons to still think about taking that third QB, and I'm not opposed to getting someone like Carr on this team or somebody else that makes sense, but we certainly don't have to.
It also just gives you that additional flexibility now as the draft moves on, because we obviously start off and I guess people would be looking at the stream saying we're in peril at the running back position. But when we get to picking up those 4 guys that we did, it also now throughout the rest of the draft gives us the positional flexibility to move between those options. We do miss out on Marvin Mims, as I mentioned, but a couple of names here that we'll be looking into. A lot of them with a lot later ADP. We're set up here on the board, and by ADP and obviously by your rank, I think Bucky Irvin is an absolute no-brainer here with this selection.
I agree. I think this has to be Bucky Irving with the 15th round with our 15th pick. Yeah, there were a few guys ahead of him by ADP, but no one ahead of him by our rankings.
And again, just to factor in, the elite tight end, and we did push it here in this draft. We went and we took 2 of the ones that we would class in that category. And you can do it if you're maybe less comfortable going for 2 tight ends in that early portion of the draft. But when we do get into this zone now, for example, Hunter Henry, Luke Musgrave went in the 14th round, but then the 15th so far we've Jonnu Smith, Tyler Conklin, Isaiah Likely, Cade Otton. Like Otton, somebody that I've mentioned in the past before, as a potential touchdown option, and did show at points last year, but really I think he's somebody who should be in the 17th, 18th round, and that's from somebody who likes him. Luke Musgrave I think is a fair value in the 14th. I would have been interested if he had got back to us, but you start to get into a very, very limited option of actual targets that you'd want to roster, and that's I guess the same way as we're looking at the running back position. there's limited targets of players that we want to get, and thankfully in this draft we've got a good number of the ones that we would want to have. But that also means that when people start to maybe panic and pick up some of these names, it means that players that you're actively targeting are going to slide their way back through to you. So we are going to be up now again in one pick. Blair, who is most intriguing to you here at this point? And by ADP, there's not a huge amount of options here. Keaton Mitchell, somebody who shows high based on your rank, but he's obviously coming back off a major injury, and now also has Derek Henry to work with in front of him there. J.K. Dobbins coming back off his injury. There's a couple of names.
Yeah, I mean, Mitchell's the top guy by my rankings. I think we could go with McLaughlin maybe. Just scrolling down a little bit, but what are you thinking?
I think I probably would take a risk on either, like, again, these players are after, like, Walker. I think by ADP, Mitchell makes the sense, and I think we have. Let's do it. I think in a vacuum, though, what I'm looking at there is, I think in a vacuum, if I was looking at the situation, you say, like, which one player do you have the most faith in having a productive season? Shipley and Walker, Devontae Walker, that is, are two players that I would be, very high on.
For sure.
But they also have an ADP in the 200s and the 210s. So we need to factor that in as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at this part of the draft, I think you can rely on those ADP numbers a lot less. People are much more willing to reach for their guys, and you should probably be more willing to reach for your guys. So I don't think it's necessarily.
I think sometimes we're too well into reach, so it's
that's probably true too.
Like I'm trying to, like, hold myself back. Like, that's what I was kind of trying to do there between those two guys. So I'm hoping one of those names makes it back to us.
I feel like definitely one of them should. And I did put Derek Carr in the queue just in case we decide we want to go that way, but we certainly don't have to. Just looking who else down this list could make sense. I mean, a final Tucker Kraft pick is maybe something to consider, but I don't think we need to go there.
I think it's something to consider if our options aren't there. But he is, again, he had success. Myself and Sean had this conversation on a recent RotoViz overtime where I said that I much preferred Musgrave, and he kind of pushed back a little bit with the Tucker Kraft side of things. So again, somebody who, when we're talking about those two guys, are both interesting, I think, for this season. So we are 3 picks away, but I think Shipley and Walker are the options. The Derek Carr one, I know obviously you said about the potential week 17 options and so on, and the final state of things, but he's somebody I would be, like, trying to add to this roster if he falls another round, for example, with Carr, that is.
Right. I've got Walker at the top of the queue just because I think there's a good chance Shipley will last until the 18th round. But if you have a strong feeling on Shipley over Walker, we can.
No, I'm good with the way the roster's built out now. We have 6 running backs, 6 wide receivers. I would like to go back to wide receiver if we get that opportunity.
Yeah. And I'd even be okay getting 8 wide receivers. All right. So Walker is still there. I think he's certainly the top wide receiver on my board. And by ADP at this point, it doesn't really matter. So we good with Walker?
Yep. The other thing I would highlight to people on the audio side, if they are listening to this, is, like, when we're looking at Blair's rankings at this particular point, filtered through, the Underdog site and ADP, there's not a lot of wide receivers that are factoring in here in terms of the top of the ranks. So, again, loading up on those guys early is good. But there is a lot of running backs. There's quite a few quarterbacks. Like, Drake May hasn't gone, Bo Nix hasn't gone. Again, there's questions how much Justin Fields will play, but he hasn't gone. Bryce Young hasn't gone. Derek Carr hasn't gone. So again, as much as having the elite quarterback on the roster is beneficial, being able to have the elite tight end and those elite wide receivers, and then still have options to backfill your quarterback position here in the last rounds is the way I would be trying to play it.
Yeah, I agree. There are, the QB window this year is pretty powerful, but there are a lot of late QB options that I find intriguing and that I'm happy getting on my roster. And of course, late rookie running backs are always
Always fun.
Always a good bet. Yes.
You mentioned the quarterback window. We didn't really touch on it when we were drafting our quarterbacks, but where do you see that this season? And I know it's going to run into our selection, but the quarterback window for you, it can open a bit wider every year. But where are you seeing it this year?
Yeah, I mean, usually, right, we think about like maybe round 6 through 12. I think you can kind of talk about maybe guys like CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson being in that window this year when they fall.
I think that's a good point on that when they fall, because I think in the fifth round,
Yeah,
I would rather like have a gap between elite and I would let them
right,
first few guys probably pass through.
right. Yeah, and I mean, even somebody whose ADP is in the 6th round, like Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray in the 7th round, Prescott in the 8th round. These are guys I don't want to take them in the 6th, 7th, 8th round. I
Yeah,
want to take them, at least a round later than that. So hopefully you're getting guys in the window, but you're also getting good ADP values on these
yeah.
guys. And I guess you could go all the way down to someone like Kirk Cousins maybe as being one of the last, or Matthew Stafford as being the last.
It's quite a spread out group, and the
Yeah.
wide receivers. We are back on the clock, but we know who we're taking. But the wide receivers or the quarterback, sorry, this year, not as condensed. I would say, more of a wide net in terms of how many are per round. There's a couple sprinkled in every round, and it gives it an interesting kind of option. So we do. I mentioned we knew who we were taking. We did take Will Shipley.
I
I think
hope you
this.
didn't mean Derek Carr.
Yeah, it does end us up with a pretty, I think, a pretty loaded team with a lot of upside at the running back position. Obviously, there's a lot of question marks as well, but um, I'm really pleased with how it's turned out with both the Packers side, the Vikings side. I think we're in an interesting team here. So to run back through the entire team, it's Jordan Love, it's JJ McCarthy at quarterback, at running back. Then with Will Shipley, Keaton Mitchell, Zach Charbonnet, Marshawn Lloyd, Chase Brown, and then Raheem Mostert. I'm trying to remember that because we weren't scrolling up the screen. I was trying to remember it from memory. Brock Bowers, Trey McBride at tight end, Jordan Addison, Jaden Reed, Devontae Smith, Chris Olave, and Justin Jefferson at wide receiver. So I think that we've like through 20 rounds there, we've hit a lot of our priority targets, I think.
Definitely, yeah. I love this team. I think this is exactly the way I want to build all my rosters. I do think with these two quarterbacks, you sometimes would want to add a third one. And, if it weren't the Saints and Derek Carr that we were talking about, if it were a different team we were talking about stacking up, then that probably would have been easier. Like if we had been able to get JSN, then you could have more easily talked me into a final round Sam Howell probably. But I do like this team. I love getting the two elite tight ends. Even though we reached on Bowers, I think I'm still happy with him there.
I think too, when you look back and you go through, like because we took him early, but there's a situation we wait in him late, we don't get the same player then 2 rounds later. You have to make a decision at some point.
Exactly.
So sometimes you have to, and it's like where I mentioned about that round 3. Sometimes you do have to take a wide receiver you like in round 4. You might have 3 wide receivers you like there, for example, and try and get 2 of them. Because what you're trying to do is build a team with a lot of firepower throughout the season, but then obviously into the playoffs. And the other thing, again, I always mention this with our team now, we have Raheem Mostert, so we can't truly say that on this team, but we try and draft young players, rookies, second year, or kind of superstar players entering their prime. And I think this team, that is what we've done outside of, asterisks.
And if you can't draft a really young player, then at least draft a really fast player. So that fits. Mostert fits there.
That works out. I think we've covered a lot. We've gone for over an hour now. We got the draft in. We talked, for people who joined us late, we talked elite tight end. We talked some of the structure for BBM5 at the start. So head back and check that out. Drop us a thumbs up on the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Past 3,000 subscribers in the last week. We really appreciate that. Blair, as we get ready to close things out, any final thoughts on the draft, or are you just looking forward to drafting more teams?
Yeah, looking forward to drafting more teams. We'll have more of these streams throughout the off season. I'll be back next week with someone. Don't know who yet, or we'll reveal that later.
That's a
But
tease. We literally
exactly.
don't know. That's the tease. But we will have a recurring cast of characters, hosts between myself and Blair, and joined by other people sometimes together. So we'll have lots of these drafts, and I will actually be starting up a live stream next Tuesday with Tom Strachan. We will be doing some DraftKings best ball drafts with him over here, and we'll be doing some on his channel as well. So that is coming up. So we'll have more live stream content coming your way. So make sure you are subscribed to get all of that. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Blair Andrews. Until we are back, have a good one.